America's founders turned that upside down, and they didn't invent this notion. They recognized and realized this notion and put it in writing in the best poetry of freedom ever written and recorded, which is our Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that they are empowered not by government, but by God with certain unalienable rights. And effectively what they said is, through the consent of the government governed, at election time, we loan this authority to politicians for a temporary period of time, and we replace them at will.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle, and welcome to the channel. And today, I'm so excited to have Mr. Bob Schaffer back on the channel. You may have seen him with Marty in the Marty Chronicles because they're really good friends. But what's interesting is I just saw a wonderful film called Whose Children Are They? And I'm going to let Bob tell you about it because he's in the film. So Bob, tell me about this film and tell me about how you got involved with this particular project.
Sure. Well, the film is called Whose Children Are They? It's a documentary about the status of education in America and some of the dirty underside and corruption associated with American public schools, and the persistent decline of the performance and the achievement of education in America, and some hopeful solutions on what parents can do to try to improve that situation in their neighborhoods, for their states, their communities, for their own families, and for the country as well. The documentary is produced by Jonathan and Deborah Flora, and those are both friends of mine, people that I know. They're from Colorado and have a background in film and act. Deborah is an actress. Jonathan is a film producer, history at Disney, and he left Disney and is now doing independent projects, and this is one of them. We got acquainted through a program called the Leadership Program of the Rockies. I'm chairman of that organization, and both of the Floras have been through the program, and education is a passion for both of them. And so just the blending of their talents and skills with this problem, which I regard as the most pressing domestic issue in America, which is public education, led them to the production of this documentary. And so in addition to being associated with them through the Leadership Program of the Rockies, I am a founder and headmaster of Colorado's most successful public charter school called Liberty Common School. It's in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's one of the top performing schools in the country consistently. And so my wife and I helped found that school over 25 years ago. And about 11 years ago, I was asked to help expand the school. Prior to that time, we did not have a high school. We were a kindergarten through ninth grade school. And so I was brought on to help lead the expansion. And then after that was accomplished, I was asked to be the principal of the high school. And now I'm the headmaster of the whole K through 12 enterprise. And so that expertise and our prior friendship led to commentary that you saw in the documentary itself.
Yes, I think the film was absolutely wonderful. I'm gonna get into some of the details and the minutia of some of those points in the film. You had two very, very prominent parts in that film, and you mentioned some of that just now. But let me ask you a question here, Bob. It's the fact that the core question in this film was, whose children are they? And we did a movie review about this, and the core question is it the state or is it the parents in terms of the role of who raises our children? Can you talk about that in terms of how that played out to the entire theme of the film?
Right. Well, this is an ongoing debate, an essential debate in any culture and in any society, and I would suggest that any time in the history of the country, history of the world, and in the future, because heavy-handed state bureaucracies, just the concept, the notion of socialism in general, lends itself to the belief in the idea that the citizens exist to serve their state, to serve their country, to serve a political process. And if that is one's worldview or political view, then you can only come to the conclusion that it is the state's responsibility to educate children and be responsible for the upbringing of those children. And so some, and I would suggest probably a majority in America today, would candidly come to the conclusion that the children belong to the state. To answer the question of the documentary, whose children are they? I believe the majority of Americans today, misguided as Americans have been and are, would answer that children are the state's responsibility. And so, hence the premise of the documentary. It is to restore and re-explore and to reassert the timeless principle that anchors itself in, let's say, natural law, for the sake of including all people of all faiths. That it is the responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children, and from an objective standpoint, the same objective standpoint used by America's founding fathers to assert the independence of individuals in an American context, context of our American Revolution, you can only come to one conclusion, and that is that it is the right responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children, and there really is no debate about that.
That is like the best answer I could have gotten from you, because you laid it right there to the core of this country, right? Individual liberties, okay? And that's what this country was founded on. I love that answer, Bob. And let's talk about the people in the film who agree with you, who come from countries like Venezuela or Cuba or China. There are two people in the film. I believe one was from China and one was from Cuba, I believe. Can you talk about, well, I don't know if you remember what they said, but just in general, a person from Cuba coming in from socialism, seeing it firsthand, or coming in from China, seeing the Cultural Revolution firsthand, either third generation or whatever, what their perspective is and what they can see in terms of this country changing. And then we should listen to them, right?
We absolutely should listen to them because they have the most recent and relevant experience, other than those who still live in those kinds of despotisms that you'll find throughout the world in socialist countries. It doesn't even have to be a communist socialist country. Even socialist countries or countries that have socialist inclinations, they understand this cultural belief system. It's a religion of sorts that you have to suspend the reality of logic in order to embrace this notion that the purpose of an individual is to serve the state. That is the essence of socialism. From an economic standpoint, that is best managed by the state managing and asserting some kind of ownership over the means of production, cost, quality, convenience of goods and services, and trade and currency and so on. You have to believe that society is that peace and prosperity is best orchestrated through the management of the state. And if that's true, then each individual must be subordinate to the state. And so what I've just described is the essence of governance in any socialist-oriented country, the extremes of which we recognize in Venezuela, in communist China, in even in Russia today, and many in European countries as well, the socialist nations that exist in Europe today. That is the mindset of those individuals, that they exist. Their highest and best achievement as individuals is to facilitate the efficiency of government and of the state. America's founders turned that upside down, and well, they didn't invent this notion. They recognized and realized this notion and put it in writing in the best poetry of freedom ever written and recorded, which is our Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that they are empowered not by government, but by God with certain unalienable rights. And effectively what they said is, through the consent of the governed, at election time, we loan this authority to politicians for a temporary period of time, and we replace them at will as individuals. So those are two competing visions that are very, very important. And so those individuals you saw whose childhood experienced communism in China and communism in Cuba, and others who had experiences in other socialist countries, they sent a wake-up call through the documentary that said, look, Americans, wake up. Don't orient your country or act as parents in a way that supports the tyranny of socialism and communism. Maintain and embrace the same level of freedom, the same passion toward freedom and individual rights that our founding fathers committed themselves to, and that successive generations of American patriots have given their lives to preserve for us. We need to maintain that vision of America for the ultimate freedom and prosperity for our children. And to the extent that that is represented by what they learn and how they acquire knowledge, we have to assert parental authority and control of our education system so that American children can learn what it means to be free and can recognize the difference and the distinction between the dehumanization of humans in socialist-oriented countries and political systems, and the flourishing human ideal that is embraced and protected and advanced through capitalism and through a nation predicated on freedom and individual liberty.
Fantastic. And the fact that you mentioned that socialism was basically that people are basically a cog in a wheel to serve the state. I had never heard that, but it reminds me of that image of Charlie Chaplin. I think it's Modern Times, when he's like in the wheel going, just a cog in the wheel and to serve the state. And I think that reminds me of that. But what's interesting is, Bob, is the fact that who is the benefactor of this, right? So it's ultimately the government, but if it's really where everyone can actually be equal, somewhat, but who actually benefits from it? It's the elite, right? So it's the ones who are actually in power, who are subjugating more or less, more like an agrarian system where you have like serfs. Would you agree with that, or am I overstepping my analogy there?
Yeah, well, there are always, especially in socialist systems, there are always those who preach and present themselves as the guardians for fairness and equality. But in doing so, they elevate themselves in an intellectual, in a phony intellectual context, and to a point where through the use of government and government power, they elevate themselves not only in stature and status within society, but they tend to favor themselves with disproportionate wealth through government. And so yes, there are those who want to use the levers of government to benefit themselves. More often, though, these countries nations end up drifting toward bondage, is what we're describing, through a combination of outright corruption and greed, but also just people who are not well educated in history, who might be well-meaning. They tend to really believe, and we see this in America among many of our own countrymen, people who believe as a political construct that fairness is best achieved by the redistribution of wealth, by suppressing those who are most efficient and effective and productive in society, and then these kinds of strategies. They really believe government is the best arbiter of fairness rather than freedom and liberty. And from that viewpoint, they view capitalism as unfair, and they view the free trade as somehow favoring those who are smart enough to thrive in that at the expense of those who are not. And they look to government as the best way to allocate fairness throughout society. And so these theories of these political theories that go back to, well, many political theorists, but Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing in the late 18th century, these are the individuals whose efforts and attempts to try to explain a social contract theory, in Rousseau's case directly, they try to establish a governing structure theoretically that seems fair and seems reasonable, but history has shown us in every single case it results in death, misery, destruction, genocides, and it never. And when I say never, it absolutely never works. The system of government that has sustained the greatest period of prosperity and fairness and freedom has been the one that the American founders invented and codified in our Declaration of Independence, ultimately our Constitution, and that is one based upon individual liberty. That's what Americans on paper stand for, have always stood for, but that is the great debate, and the reason this documentary that you have seen is so profound and so worth seeing. It really parses the drift away from the purpose of American education over the 250-year history of our country, and the drift that it has taken in the last 120, 130 years toward indoctrinating children towards a political worldview of socialism.
Yeah, there's a really famous clip of Milton Friedman on Phil Donahue. It's about, I don't know, 40 seconds long, where he's talking about capitalism and talking about how capitalism is the only system in government that's been able to pull people out of it. It's a fantastic. And Donahue's face is just like, he's like, yeah, I mean, he let him talk. It was a really good clip. I'll put that in the bottom below here. But you broached the subject of education. Getting back to the film, because that's kind of what I want to segue into. You did it brilliantly for me. Thank you. Is to say, we fix it by changing our education system and teaching correct education, not Black liberation theology, not CRT, not 1619, but actual non-revisionist history, which is inclusive, but it's also giving the full story of like this 1639 Plymouth and, you know, the other colony, I forget which one it was at the moment, but both of them in their totalitarianism or in their collectivism were anti-slavery. They punished people who were mistreating blacks and so forth, but that never gets taught in our school systems. And wallbuilders.com talks about that. I'll leave a link there below to what I'm talking about. But back to the point about the movie, how do you think the film does in terms of educating a person who's coming off the street like myself, not knowing about the dangers of public education, in terms of not public education per se, but what's being taught in public education and what we can do about it? Because my kids are private school and homeschooled. So for a person like me, just seeing it, what should we look to think and do in terms of action, in terms of maybe making a difference?
Well, the first thing the documentary tries to accomplish and does very well is, I think it exposes efforts by public schools in America to undermine the family and to undermine American institutions, especially the church. By first pushing God out of schools and religion out of schools generally, and replacing it with the religious precepts of socialism. And so, and those are things that you must believe as an element of faith. The rewriting of American history, separated from the reality of history, is something that you just mentioned. But you could also attach a religion and a faith that is devoid of cardinal virtue that one can apply just by logic or also by faith, that has been revealed to us through by God directly. And then another example that isn't so much part of this documentary, but is evident and maybe even implied, is the religion associated with environmentalism, feminism, other political strategies that are deployed in schools that are designed to push God out of families, away from individuals, and to undermine families in general, and then to either misdirect or miseducate American students. So the documentary opens our eyes to those deliberate and somewhat successful efforts that are being unfolded and that are being perpetrated in public schools today. The next thing the documentary does is suggests ways for parents to reassert their natural God-given parental authority when it comes to their kids. You mentioned homeschooling, you mentioned private schooling. Those are the two most obvious options that are available for parents right now. But the documentary suggests that we should not abandon the public square of public education, that parents need to get energized and re-engage themselves and never give up fighting for the reclamation of public education in America today. And they give many examples. Charter schools would be one example, but also just confronting school board members at town hall meetings and at school board meetings and at other political gatherings with the American truths and and forcibly pushing and promoting the proper elements of what American education should be. And the whole point is that when American families, parents, rise up and demand that their voices be heard and that justice be rendered in the halls of public government-owned education, that parents do win victories. And there were examples given of the recent governor's race in Virginia, for example, where this topic resulted in an incumbent being defeated and a new regime being put in place that is more pro-parent. And we're seeing that kind of phenomenon occurring all across the country, on a statewide level in the case of Virginia, but at school board levels throughout the land. And so that is that's the goal. That is the purpose. That is the effect of this documentary. It shows examples, opens the eyes of parents who care about what's taking place in American schools, and then gives them hopeful and positive examples of where assertive parents are winning the day, and suggests to all viewers that you need to get involved in the public square, make this kind of change on behalf of your own children, your own families, but then from there, your community, your state, ultimately the nation. And this is the way to restore a proper nation that's focused on individual rights, individual freedom and flourishing, and try to restore our country back to its intended purpose of being a nation that exists for those primary purposes first and foremost.
That's very well said. In fact, I would leave it right there, but I do want your comment. I asked you a comment on this question here, and then if you can close it out and tell people how they can get a hold of you, that'd be awesome. And the comment here I have, I want your response to is, I'll give you a story here quickly. When I was running my local chapter of the Young Republicans here locally, I got confronted with a staunch Democrat. This is about 10 years ago, a long time ago. So anyway, they wanted me to come with them and talk about school choice and speak on behalf of a nonpartisan effort to expand it across the country, vouchers, all kinds of different flavors of school choice. It comes to different flavors per state. And I was shocked to see how that was the only issue that was bipartisan going back to, let's say, 2006, 2007. And my question to you is, and they mentioned it in this film here, is that an area, a very easy, tangible area for parents to get on board with school choice? I'm against the fact of having kids having to be forced to a bad, unperforming area if the parents don't want them there. What's your thoughts on that? And is that a viable avenue for parents to pursue?
It is, and this is politically, this is a very ripe area of within national political dialogue, where the political right and the political left can come together. People who are traditionally Democrats or identify with the Republican Party, where we all can come together. And we've seen this happen throughout the country. I've seen this happen in Colorado. And the reason is because ultimately, this notion of parents having the ultimate right and responsibility and authority to direct the education and upbringing of their children. I keep using that phrase because that is the universal principle associated when it comes to parenthood and child rearing. That brings people together, regardless of one's political viewpoint. We know that to be true. Where the wheels come off the cart is when when political organizations, school district, states, and the U.S. Department of Education get into the mechanics of operating and orchestrating public schools, and when that process gets polluted with teacher unions, the devastating impact of teacher unions. That's also something that the documentary spends a good deal of time exploring. That is the political poison that infects public education in America today and makes this argument difficult when we lend the outcomes to public servants or government leaders. So when we talk about parents coming together, that is the remedy. That is what pushes the poisonous influence of teachers' unions out of the equation and causes people on both sides of the political spectrum to realize that children matter more than anything else. People on the left and people on the right can agree with that precept, and when they do, there is great unity in an American context. And so you're correct. If parents can rally around their authority, their responsibility, their moral duty to raise their kids to the best of a family's ability, that makes unions less relevant. It disempowers the bureaucracies associated with public education, and that is what really is needed. And when those kinds of approaches have been tried, rallying families around the concepts of real choice or vouchers or more options in a marketplace, such as charter schools or choice within a public district context or homeschooling and so on. When those topics are presented to the public, yeah, they find great enthusiasm on both the political left and the political right, and it turns out that those families find that their only opponents tend to be those who are employed by the government-owned, unionized, bureaucratic system of public schools, and those who profit from it politically, and those tend to be, or are always, the operatives of teacher unions. Now, teacher unions tend to be Democrat, almost entirely associated with the Democrat Party, and so that's why that's where that wedge needs to be driven deeper within the political mix of voters and activists. Is more Democrats need to realize that it is the teachers' unions that have long been their political partners, usually on a cash basis, a fundraising political resource basis, need to be separated from the long-term goals of those who truly love children and care about the strength of families in America going forward.
Amen, Bob. You hit it all there. I'm glad you mentioned the teachers unions, because I was going to hit that a little bit, but I didn't want to touch that since you brought it up. But yeah, I agree 100%, Bob. And I just want to just thank you so much for your insight and your heart and your dedication, you and your wife, for building this school. I read up about it, and it's just so impressive. Would you like to tell everyone, if you want to plug your school, what you're doing, sure, how people can get a hold of you, how can they plug in, and where they can see the film? I have links below, but is there anything that they can do to watch it or see it?
Sure. I mean, Whose Children Are They? They've got a website. They're all over social media as well. If you just type those words in and do a search, you'll find the next iterations and viewings of that documentary. They have not been announced as of this moment, but they will be soon. I don't know personally right now. I'm not the producers, but I know that there will be new announcements soon about where that can be viewed next. Regarding my school, it's called Liberty Common School. It's a charter public school in Fort Collins, Colorado. The website is www.libertycommon.org. And I urge people to go visit our website. If you're in Colorado or near northern Colorado in Fort Collins, we do tours at the school all the time. I and the principals of our elementary and our high school and our other administrators, are part of our job duties entail traveling and spending time explaining and promoting our school as a model for what great education should be. The academic results speak for themselves, and we're quite proud of the managerial processes we put in place that we share as a public resource. We don't contain the secret sauce just within the school. Our mission and duty as an institution is to share that with anybody who is interested in replicating some of the successes in the school. So we are available to assist and participate and support in those kinds of ways. And so just look us up. Again, libertycommon.org. You can find me there and other administrators in the school. People come from all around the country to spend the day sitting in on our classrooms, touring the school. And so if you're in that category of trying to start up a charter school or expand your school or just trying to improve your school, send an administrator, a delegation of teachers perhaps out to the school. We'd be happy to coordinate. We're doing this every day in our school. We'd love to have you, anybody on our guest list for future visits to Liberty Common School.
That is absolutely wonderful, Bob. God bless you for what you're doing. And everyone else, this is The Conservative Take. All the links he mentioned just now are going to be in the comments below, in the descriptions. So please check it out. I just joined your YouTube channel, by the way, yesterday, I believe. And so I'm trying to plug in as much as I can as well. We're so behind you, Bob, what you're trying to do here.
Well, thanks for having me on and for your attention to this topic. It really is the most important domestic issue confronting our country. And so I'm grateful for everyone taking it as seriously as it deserves.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. Okay, everybody, this is The Conservative Take. My name is Kyle for Bob Schaffer. I will see you guys in the next video.